time tomorrow, we'll have a clear idea of Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's plan as far as the budget is concerned. And Stellenbosch University's Business School Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko says that the budget should prioritize a growing economy and not simply target a budget balance. She's gone on to write that inclusive growth, which also triggers investment and reinvestment into productive growth areas, is what's needed. Dr. Moleko is a faculty member at the University of Stellenbosch's Business School, where she teaches economics and statistics, and she's joining us now to talk about her expectations when the Finance Minister speaks at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Doctor, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Newsfeed PM. So let's break that down in simple language, what you mean about how we should be prioritizing the important bits of that budget, especially where growth is concerned.
So thank you so much for having me, and a very good afternoon to yourself and the listeners. Well, we know that the budget speech, in terms of what can be expected from the minister, is that we are likely to see a maintenance of the neoliberal framework within which his predecessor operated in, and even the one before him, in terms of policy position as a country. What that has meant is that we've seen continued cutting of expenditure, a maintenance of what we call fiscal consolidation, and that management of your debt to GDP ratios as the key themes of the speech, and you'll see that unpacked in different ways. And it's likely that the economic paradigm will be retained. What that means is that we will not yield, even in this financial year, more than 1.8% projected in terms of growth. What then we point to is to say, if we continue with this kind of economic trajectory and we maintain the revenue generation, which will maintain the allocation in terms of expenditure, what do we need to therefore do differently? And this is where we come in with a different economic paradigm shift. I say we need a complete paradigm shift. We need to look at alternatives that will boost our productive capacity, boost our exports, look at ways to have labor absorptive capabilities boosted so that we can deal with the particular problem of unemployment, which is very pervasive, as we know, and also look at ways to diversify economic sectors and new entrants, particularly black SMME-owned participants into the economy who are not in the mainstream economy right now.
But I wonder if this current government has the appetite, the guts to move in that direction.
Well, we needed to have the guts, and why I say this. Multidimensional poverty is on the rise. Absolute poverty is on the rise. Inequality, we know, is the worst in the world. There's a new dimension of gender poverty where we're seeing high levels of unemployment with women, high levels of wage inequality with women, particularly in the labor market. And we're seeing a labor attrition, labor market force that is unable to absorb the large majority of our new labor market entrants. And so what that means is that if we don't respond to the current economic woes, and many have said in the market that it's an economic crisis, even if we say the budget is good, and a lot of the commentary is saying that we can expect a good budget. But what we need to look at is a good budget for who? Right? Is it for the people and the masses of our people who are on the periphery or on the fringes of the economic participation and not really actively participating? And I think that's the question we need to ask. And there has to be an appetite for this because it is a crisis and will lead to social, economic, political, and other effects in terms of having an adverse effect for the country.
Let's talk about the South Africans who are on the periphery. These are South Africans who, about 10 million, I think, will be waiting over the next year and relying quite a lot on that relief grant. 350 rand doesn't go very far, let's be honest, in South Africa, but for them it is a crucial source of assistance. How do we balance the books to make sure that A, that money is able to carry them through the next 12 months, and B, that when the time comes for another recalculation, perhaps with the view to make it a permanent thing, the numbers add up?
So what we've seen in the medium-term budget policy statement in October was the announcement of what we call the fiscal response. So this includes various measures that look at additions, consolidations, and reprioritizations in the budget. And what we saw was, for an example, an additional 26 billion. I think the exact number is 26.7 billion. That was an additional allocation to the Department of Social Development for directly speaking to COVID relief and the social relief and distress grant. What we also saw was about a 500 million allocation for the management thereof. And so there has been in the current budget, in the current fiscal framework that we're talking to, an allocation of that. It is likely, I think you said right at the insert, that there has been an announcement. I think there's a lot of punting, a lot of talk. We are all being prophets now, hoping that there will be some positive announcement in this regard. But let's wait and see what Minister Enoch Godongwana says on the call for the fiscal measure. What we have seen is that the effect is that the budget balance, which means that the expenditure versus the revenue, has been consistently around 400 to 500 billion, depending on what you year on year. And what we have seen is that the result is that the deficit is around 6%, lower than the estimated 7.8 initially for the last year. And it may mean that there's some expenditure increase that we may see in the budget, which then the minister may use for these allocations. So there is a fiscal response allocation for these programs.
And on jobs and investment, Labour often gets quite nervous when this time of year rolls around, because they say often investment is punted at the expense of workers, almost as though they always have to give up something in order for investors to come to South Africa. Is that an accurate reading?
I think what we've seen is an investment-led strategy by the policy of the government. What that means is that what the government policy position has been is to say, what can we do to try and enable investment from the private sector, from foreign companies, from multinationals? And what that has resulted in is that the policy positions of the government and of the country speak to that. The outcome of that from a FDI perspective, and if you look at the measure of FDI over time, is that we've still been unable to reach that 25% to GDP level of investment that's required to push up growth. We are sitting at between 16 to 18%, arguably, over the last 5 to 10 years. And specifically, there's been a dip in the last year because of the COVID effect across the globe. Now, what that means is that before COVID, we had seen both public and private sector investments really contract. Does that mean now, post-COVID, this type of a response is going to deal not only with the more than 1.4 million losses net that we were not able to recover, but how then do we deal with the current economic structure and the growth part that we have, and how do we absorb those who have not been able to be part of that? And I think that an investment-led strategy really needs to be discussed as to, should we not be looking at a state-led industrialization strategy, which would deal with not only driving what I call crowding in investment, not only to your private sector, but also key sectors that are going to help us not only increase exports to generate revenue, to generate surpluses, but to boost labor absorption, which is a critical component of a healthy economy. Where your people are not working, it's pointing you to an unhealthy economy. It's pointing you to failures in the labor market that require not the business sector, but really the state to provide policy direction and deal with the market failures. And we've seen this repeatedly over the years. And I think that we definitely need what I call state-led industrialization, state-led subsidization of some of these sectors. And there's a lot of debates around, inefficiencies, non-competitiveness across economic articles and economic policy space. But I think the question what we need to look at South Africa is, if we continue on this path for another 5 years, what will be the outcome? Can we afford to have a growth of 1.8%? Can we afford to have unemployment of youth at 77%? Can we afford to have women unemployment of 54%? Can we afford to have Limpopo, Eastern Cape sitting with unemployment levels over 50%? This is unsustainable. Poverty levels over 40% if you look at the multidimensional. These are things that we need to decisively respond to. And I really believe that these are some of the critical state-led development where you need the state to intervene where the market has been unable. At the same time, you look at what can you do to make sure that there's private sector participation and enable that accordingly. But I think that the state has to drive that development using policy.
Thank you very much for that. We're speaking to Dr. Moleko from the Stellenbosch University School of Business.